says, don't stop to greet anybody on the road. So we'll come to that in a second. Someone else. Yes.
I was meeting with Ed, he's a member of this church here. He was at our church in Rocky Mountain House here not too long ago, but unfortunately I wasn't there.
Oh,
But we never even got to these questions.
you didn't. You stopped to greet each other on the road.
That was one of them.
Yeah.
But we also discussed something perhaps different. The different reaction or the different understanding or the difference in voices.
Uh-huh.
The same reading from this gentleman here seemed to say something different than from that lady over there.
Good observation. Great observation. Yeah. Yeah. That hearing the scriptures read by different people in different voices actually invites us to be encountered by the scriptures in ways we might not expect. Yeah. Yes.
There's a request that people who speak shout so they can be heard.
Please. In German, cum magna laude. Big voice.
Thank you.
We got someone here.
I'd like to introduce Ole, my new best friend.
Ole is the new best friend. I don't believe it.
We had a good talk in 10 minutes we chatted. Anyhow, what Ole heard was focus and a determination. And perhaps that's the answer to why you don't read anybody. I don't know.
Be focused. Yeah, and be determined. Yeah, okay. Others. Mark.
My new friend here is Evelyn. She's from just down the road. One of her questions about this was, what transpired just before this text?
Now after these things.
After this?
Yeah.
before the appointed set
What
time.
was going on before, after these things? And of course, if you read chapter 9, you'll get some clues to that. But we'll come back to that in a moment. That's a really important question. Yeah.
Carol, Gail, and I spoke, and we had many questions, and one of them was the 70 people were sent out to cure the sick. We wondered how they were going to do that. We also
They used Obamacare.
That's right. We wondered about the harshness of the latter part of the text, that wiping your feet off in protest and that things were going to happen to someone who didn't, to towns who didn't welcome you.
Yeah.
So we had many questions. We also had questions about peace. The idea of your peace will rest on that person, but if not, if they don't share the peace with you, it will be returned to you.
Yeah.
And we're of the thinking that we share the peace, and how is it returned to us? But lots of good questions.
Hey, great question. This is a messy text. You can't wrap it up in a neat bow after a 20-minute sermon with 3 applications to take with you. You've got healing, which engages people with this harsh condemnation. I mean, what do you do with that? How do those things hold together? I mean, we can say, isn't Jesus wonderful? Healing, but what's Jesus doing with this kind of judgment? Yeah, so you you can't fit it all together. What's going on here? Yeah, thank you. Others, yeah.
I'd like to introduce Terry, my new friend. And Terry, you must have a strong faith, because he said, taking nothing with you would strengthen your faith. And I thought, if it was me, it would challenge it.
Me too. There's a Presbyterian who has written a translation by the name of Eugene Peterson. And his translation of this is, leave your baggage at home. Right? Now, I travel all the time, all around the world, and I make sure that I only travel with what I can carry and put up above when I travel, whether I'm going for 3 days or 3 weeks. I want to tell you, you'd be stunned at what people bring with them to go on a trip. I mean, the biggest bags that God ever invented. There'll be lots of baggage. So what's going on here in a text in which Jesus says, you've actually got to leave all your baggage behind when you go on this journey? You go, ooh, not quite prepared for that. Others?
My new friend Rick and myself, almost in unison to the first question, where did your imagination stop?
Yeah,
It didn't. That goes on.
it kept going on.
It's going on.
Okay?
In unison.
Lots of stuff. We'll come over here and then we'll come to the back.
I want to introduce Leanne. This is my new friend. And she said that kind of the same response here on the question, where did her imagination stop? It stopped at the first statement. This is the reality, that they were being sent out in pairs, that were being sent out into the community. So similar, I mean, it's just a different way to say it. It stopped at the first statement and then it went on from there.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I'm Phil McKinnon, and my first, I got stopped at the point that the two ladies over there talked about greeting no one on the road, which seems quite unfriendly, especially when you're out on the trail. If you don't just walk past people and don't say anything, it seems very unfriendly, quite unchristian at the best of times. My friend Earl Olson from St. John's in Calgary, he said he got stopped the third line from the bottom where it talks about they do not welcome you. They just, the abruptness interrupted the flow, is what it first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Again, this is it's disruptive. It's disruptive. It's kind of, doesn't all fit together. Why these things? Any others you want to do? We'll do Julianne and then we'll come back.
This is from Edson. 70 people is a lot of people. They were simply sent out without a lot of instructions. It seems like in our churches we can do God's work too because we have the basic information too.
Okay. Lots of people, simple instructions. Yeah.
My new friend Phil from Ascension in Edmonton, I thought it brought up an interesting point. If you're sending 35 teams out, there must have been some risky planning. You know, I'm thinking of a congregational sense.
Yeah. Yeah. 35 teams. Just get out there and go. Okay. Anybody else before we... Yeah.
I guess, this is my friend Greg from Minnesdale, and part of our conversation, I guess, just to, maybe not be on there already, was we were a little, questioning why just one house and why not move from house to house.
Yeah, why not move about? Why stay in one house? Why not move about from house to house? Yeah, why don't we just become, why don't we just Jehovah's Witness, say, door to door, give out the pamphlet, move on, what's next?
Hi, I'm Jeff, and he was stopped quite close to the beginning with the, he himself intended to go.
Yeah,
So why did the Lord not go himself? And does that then maybe bring us to the question of why me?
yeah, great question, and fabulous question. Yeah, because Luke is framing a whole theology here of the fact that we now are Jesus as we go and enter these places. This is all about who we are and our dignity. All right. Yeah, one
I have
more.
a general question.
Oh, okay.
When you said a lady read it and then a man read it, and there was a difference,
Yeah.
difference in feeling tone,
Yes.
but basically, so I was sort of leading to the fact is one good and one bad, and it's not the right way, and this sort of thing, because I think we're constantly trying to find the right thing, and that's where I have trouble.
Okay.
Just to let it happen, not right, wrong, or any different.
Let it happen.
Let it happen here again now. It sounded to me like you were saying it was better when the man wrote it. Read it.
Oh, if you heard me say that, I apologize. Not at all.
I'm not saying it in a derogatory way.
Right.
I'm saying it as that's sort of the way that it brought in this other idea.
Okay, yeah.
I think when it comes to the question of where did your imagination stop, for me it stopped where it was at peace. And because it didn't want to go on further where it was going beyond into an area I didn't want to go to.
Ah, you wanted to stay with the peace. Yeah, and Jesus keeps messing with that peace, doesn't he? Yeah. There's someone over here, and then, yes.
This has been brought up, this is my friend John, and he did several things. One was the thing about where he intended to go, because he didn't know that it was Jesus going to actually make it there. So that meant that we were kind of ambassadors, the people he sent out, but also lambs into the midst of wolves.
Yeah,
It's not going to be friendly where you're going.
not always.
And who the laborer was.
Uh-huh.
Like, are we the laborer? Or is
Uh-huh.
the laborer God and Christ through us? And he stopped to say, do not move from house to house, because that broke the flow.
Yeah. If you get involved in all of this, you're going to spend a lot of time in this text. So we're not here today to kind of pull it all apart. But did you notice, somewhere in the middle of the text, it says the laborer deserves to be paid. Did you notice that? Anybody go, what's that about? Huh? And it has something to do with, don't move about from house to house, but stay in one place. And that it seems like these are Jesus' instructions. So let me give you a picture here. What if, when Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful and the laborers are few, he wasn't speaking to ministers who needed a text on evangelism. That he was actually describing the reality on the ground. It was harvest time, and there was, I don't know what they grow there, wheat to be brought in, and there weren't enough people to bring it in. And Jesus was sending these disciples out to go and join a household to take in the harvest. Now, this is a different reading of the text. Because now, what Jesus is saying is, join with the household, the community of people in that town. Become part of their economic and social life. And in the midst of becoming a part of their economic and social life, heal the sick. And talk about the kingdom. And don't bring your baggage with you. And it's a whole different way of thinking about this stuff. But we're going to get into this a lot more as part of this process. But I got some questions to ask you before we move on. Fiona was very careful to give you some instructions. And you've talked about some. First instruction was, let's listen. And the way she gave you those instructions was, let's listen to another who is kind of a stranger. Because she said, go find somebody that you don't know or you don't know very well. And sit with them and listen to them or listen to the stranger. Remember that instruction? Right? Which is sort of like the sending of the 70, isn't it? And then, remember, she said, when you report back, we want you to report back what you heard your reasonably friendly stranger saying to you. And then you reported that back out loud. So, just for a moment, as you think about those instructions, why do you think we gave you those instructions? What was going on in giving you some of those instructions? Any reflection on that?
We needed a purpose.
You needed a purpose, and it gave you some simple steps to take, didn't it? Yeah. Just Jesus gave these disciples some very simple steps. Go together. Don't take baggage with you. Go enter and become part of a community of people. Work with them and in the midst of working with them, very simple instructions. So yeah, that was one of the pieces. Why else do you think we were doing this?
Almost modeling, like, this is a very friendly.
It's very
group,
safe.
Very safe.
Very safe.
But if we were going out into a food court
Yeah.
and doing it, it would be a lot different.
More wolves.
But in order, yeah, many more wolves, but in order to be able to have the confidence, I guess, to do it, we need to, it's like anything, you need to practice.
Got to practice,
In
yeah.
in a safe
Yeah,
environment.
yeah. How many of you are like me? Well, let me, where's that Globe and Mail I brought with me today? I'll soon be done. Globe and Mail. Now, it's probably not as good as the National Post, but Globe and Mail. How many of you saw these headlines today? Why are we so lonely? You saw that? How many of you then are like me? It's supper time, and you're just sitting down for supper, and the phone goes. Cell phone or landline. And if you have a landline, that's a symbol of how old you are. And you pick up the phone, and when you pick it up, first there's this kind of silence. And then there's Alan. First name personal. And you go, yes. And before your brain clicks in, you're into a sales pitch. Right? How many of you experienced that? Okay. That's one question. Second question. How many of you can remember the last time, I'm not going to ask a show of hands here, how many of you can remember the last time someone outside of a spouse or close friend actually sat with you and said, Julianne, how you doing? And they didn't have a pitch ready to give after they asked that question. You ever get the sense that we live in a world where every relationship, almost anymore, is about something they got to sell you or they want you to do? Ever get the sense that somehow it wasn't planned, no conspiracy here, but we sort of drifted into a world where actually nobody wants to pay attention to who I am as a human being unless they can get me to do something or give something for them. Right? Does that give you clues about what Jesus might be meaning when he says, leave all your baggage behind? So what we were doing was saying, experience a moment when another human being who isn't married to you or a close friend or something else, or a pastor, is simply listening to you. And in that listening is saying to you, God speaks through you. God's up to something through you. That's what we were seeking to create. That moment of hearing the other. We call it learning to listen one another into free speech. And we talk about this as believing that what God is saying to us about being the church is actually not primarily coming from a pulpit, but becoming from amongst us. And how do we call it forth? So that's what we're up to. And in this process that we'll lay out for you, we're going to do a lot of dwelling in the Word and listening to this text. One more thing about the text before we move on, and I pass it back to Fiona. Do you notice how this text fundamentally reverses the questions that we ask about being God's people? all the places I go, all the churches I work with, practically 99.9% of the time, the people of these churches are asking one basic question. What do we need to do to get people out there to come and be a part of our church in here? That's over and over again the question is being asked. And I'm not saying that's not an important question, but did you notice that Jesus fundamentally reverses? And Jesus says, what I'm up to is not about asking, how do we get them out there to come in here? It's fundamentally about how do we go and enter the lives of the people in the communities and the neighborhoods where we live. Because you see, that's where God's up to stuff. That's where God's doing things. And so part of this text is inviting us into a whole different place. Now, we're going to talk about how to go there, but that's part of the journey. With that in mind, I'm going to pass it over to Fiona, and she's going to invite you to think about your church in the midst of this journey.
So what we want to do now is just look at where your churches are right now. So not where you want to go, what you want to be, all the hopes and dreams you have necessarily for your churches, but where are your churches at right now? So we're going to look at some different types of churches. And if you turn to the third page of the handout, you'll see the title is What Type of Church Are You Right Now? So what I'm going to do is describe these 4 different types of churches with some stories so you get an idea of what we mean by those types of churches. And as you're listening to the description of the types of churches, what I want you to be thinking about is where is the primary focus of energy in your church right now relative to these different types. Now, you could have aspects of these different types of churches at work in a single congregation, but this is about where is the primary focus of energy, okay? So the first type of, there's all the 4. So the first type of church is a reactive church. Now, a reactive church is one that looks around it and just reacts sometimes often negatively to the environment around. Or to put it another way, it's a church that has been in its neighborhood for a long time, and the neighborhood around it has changed. And the response is one of real uncertainty and discomfort, and really not knowing quite how to deal with that. So I can think of a church that I was talking to recently. They are in a community, the church has been in its particular space for probably close to 100 years. So the neighborhood that was built around this church, when this church was originally built, has changed considerably in the last 100 years. The cultural mix, the age mix, the surroundings in the neighborhood of this church is really changed a lot. One of the things that they're struggling with a lot is the ethnic diversity in their community. Their community used to be very typical, homogeneous, pretty white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of neighborhood. Everybody understood each other, they had the same kind of cultural background, and and their congregation reflected what was around them. Now, the community that surrounds them is very diverse. They have people who have come from mainland China, from Korea, from other parts of Southeast Asia, and their congregation still looks the way it originally did as far as the mix of people goes, and it doesn't look like the neighborhood that's around it. And they really don't know what to do about that. They're struggling a lot to figure out where is our place in this? And where they're landing is we need to really care deeply for each other because we're feeling a little bit lost. And that's not to say they shouldn't care deeply for each other. Of course they should. But that's their struggle. Around them has changed. They're kind of wanting to hold on tight and protect each other because they're feeling bewildered. And they're feeling a little bit like, threatened is too strong a word, but they're feeling very reactive and very insecure in who they are as a group, given that everything that's around them has changed. Okay, so that's a reactive church. The next one is a developmental church. Now, a developmental church is one that says, okay, things around us have changed. And what we need to do is take what we do now and do it better. Because if we do it better, then the people that are around us now that we don't know, they're going to come because all we need to do is figure out how to do this better. And that will be sufficient reason for people to come. So they work in an attractional model. We need to attract people in our community around us. And if we can do what we do even better, then those people will come. So that could look like lots of things. I know of another church who have looked around their community and they go, you know what? Sunday morning is just tough for families because soccer games are on Sunday mornings. The kids play soccer on Sunday mornings. And so, you know what? We need to make our offering more diverse. And if we do that, then the people that don't make it on a Sunday morning because there's all kinds of other pressures going on in their lives will come the other time. So they decided, okay, we'll do a Saturday evening service. We'll make it a little bit different in style. We'll have different kinds of music, different way of engaging scripture, but we'll make it on a different day. So they figured, okay, we're responding to what's happening in our neighborhood, knowing that there's all these other pressures going on, and all we need to do is offer church at a different time, and then people will be able to come. Now, obviously it's important to think about how we do worship and imagine different ways of doing it, because we know that different things and different styles resonate with different people. But there's an assumption there that if you just change the way you do it, if you do it better, then that's going to be sufficient. And people are going to go, oh yeah, that's great. I want to become a part of that. Now the next type of church we call a transitional church. And this is a church where they're spending energy, important energy, in making sure that they have a really good worship service, they have great resources in their church, they have programs that they feel will resonate with people, and they're starting to ask the question, what's going on around our church? What's going on in the neighborhood and the community that's around our church? So, an example of that is, I know of a congregation in Toronto whose neighborhood around them has changed quite a bit. And I thought, okay, we need to go and understand a little bit more about the people that are living around our church. So they went out and they were talking with people, just, sort of very casually. There people would be doing their groceries or whatever, and they would be talking with people in their community. And they were in a situation that had a very diverse ethnic mix of people. And even the different ethnic mixes were having trouble figuring out how to relate to each other. So what they ended up was with the different pockets all around their church. So what they decided to do was to have a community garden. And they would just invite anybody in their neighborhood to come and participate in this community garden. And the purpose of the garden was not to say, okay, if you get into working in our garden, then you're going to come to our church. That wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to create a space in their neighborhood because they realized that these different groups of ethnicities that had come into their community weren't talking to each other. They didn't know how to. They didn't know how to bridge those gaps. And the people who were in their church were not really sure how to do that either. So they created this community garden so everybody came together with a common purpose. They worked in the garden together. They got to know each other. They learned how to talk to each other. They learned about the traditions and the backgrounds of the various people that had come into their neighborhood. So they were starting to figure out, okay, how do we engage with the communities and the neighborhoods that we're a part of now? And they were also still working on their own internal programs and their own offerings and all that. A transformational church is one that is constantly remaking itself based on what's happening around in its neighborhood. And there are not too many churches out there who are in that place, who are really just, their reason for being and their reason for all the decisions that they make is in response to what is going around in their neighborhoods. What is God doing around them? And what they do is they just focus on paying attention to that all the time and working towards constantly transforming and remaking themselves. So what I want you to do now is, I think you've got enough. If you have any, do you have any questions about any of those types of churches before we go any further? You got a picture of what those are like. So I want you to circle on your page 3 there. What type of church do you think your church is? And again, this is where is the primary focus of energy. So you may have some aspects of each of those 4 at work in your church, but where is the primary focus of energy? Yeah.
Actually, I'm not sure I'm entirely clear between transitional and transformational.
The transitional is sort of in between developmental and transformational.
So what would be the key differentiator between a transitional church and a transformational church?
That a transitional church is still working on making sure that what they offer is the best. So they're still focusing on what they've got to get people to come into where they are.
As opposed to a transformational church?
Whose purpose is not to bring people in, but to be working with what God is doing around them. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay. So, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to, sorry, was there another question?
Oh, no, thank you.
No? Okay. So in a minute, what I'm going to ask you to do is move around again. So in this corner over here, this will be the reactive church corner. Right by that red banner back there will be the developmental church corner. Over by, over here, we'll have the transitional church corner, and over here, the transformational one. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, in a second, get up and go to where you think the primary focus is in your church. And what we're going to do is spend some time talking to people in your group and hear their stories about why they think that the primary focus of energy in their church is where they've landed. And then we're going to ask you to report back to the bigger group some of the stories that you're hearing. And if you're really not sure, stand in the middle. Okay? So everybody get up and move. Reactive, developmental, transitional, and transformational.